On a dry August morning in Ouagadougou, under a relentless Sahel sun, a man stepped forward and rewrote everything we thought we knew about Africa's place in the digital world. No negotiations, no consultations, just 22 minutes of action that left Europe scrambling and the world stunned. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, 36 years old, didn't announce a dream. He unveiled a reality: Faso Telecom, a fully sovereign, fully operational telecommunications network, designed and built entirely in Burkina Faso. For the first time in modern African history, a landlocked, economically sanctioned country built a nationwide digital grid without foreign contractors, loans, or permissions. The moment he made the declaration, every satellite pointing to West Africa blinked in confusion. It wasn't a press stunt. It wasn't a pilot project. This was the launch of a national infrastructure worth $1.2 billion USD, executed in just over a year, by engineers whose names were unknown outside their villages. It shocked global analysts. It angered foreign investors. But for millions of Burkinabè, it felt like justice had finally spoken through fiber cables. Just a few years ago, when protests erupted across the capital, foreign telecom providers shut down entire provinces at the flick of a switch. Families were cut off. Hospitals lost communication. The silence was weaponized. That silence didn't fade. It hardened into purpose. Now, the signal belongs to the people. What happened in those 22 minutes wasn't just an announcement. It was a reckoning, a break from a system that had long dictated who could speak, who could connect, and who had the right to be heard. If you've ever felt what it's like to be unheard, if your history has been filtered through someone else's signal, stay with us. Because this isn't just Burkina Faso's story. It's about who controls the wires and what happens when we take them back. Faso Telecom is not a concept. It is a functioning sovereign network. Those were the words that echoed from President Traoré's press podium to every relay tower across Burkina Faso. But behind that sentence stood an astonishing feat: 4,200 kilometers of fiber optic cable, crisscrossing deserts, hills, and rural towns. From the outskirts of Pama to the rocky valleys of Gorom. 65 satellite stations were erected, not in France, not in China, but in Koudougou, Ouahigouya, and Bobo Dioulasso, by 647 Burkinabè engineers, 83% of them under the age of 35. These young minds were not trained in Boston or Paris. They were trained at the Faso Tech Institute, established barely a year before construction began. They had no multinational mentors, no global licenses. What they had was soil, urgency, and purpose. In 14 months, Burkina Faso launched the most ambitious digital project in sub-Saharan Africa. And they did it with zero foreign financial assistance. No IMF, no World Bank, no telecom conglomerates. Instead, the funds, $1.2 billion, came from within. Here's how. Military spending once used to host foreign forces was redirected. Gold royalties previously funneled overseas were seized, renegotiated, and reinvested. A telecom sovereignty fund was created using domestic levies once paid to foreign carriers. In a remote highland village outside Djibo, a 12-year-old boy named Hamadou now logs in every morning to Faso Learn using a solar-powered tablet. Before, there was no signal, no classroom. Now, his lessons are broadcast in his native Moré dialect, taught by volunteer teachers from the University of Ouagadougou. He doesn't know who built Google, but he knows who built Faso Learn. This transformation wasn't built from borrowed code or imported blueprints. Every routing decision was mapped using satellite data from Burkina Faso's own constellation, launched in June 2025. Cables were built in regional plants. Towers were engineered to endure Sahel heat, sandstorms, and irregular power grids. No Western corporation would have considered these local realities. But these weren't Western towers. These were Burkinabè towers, designed by people who knew what it felt like to live in digital silence. Just months earlier, the French telecom giant Télé SA still controlled 92% of the country's digital infrastructure. They stored Burkinabè data in Paris. When protests erupted in 2021, they cut signal to entire provinces, without warning or explanation. No accountability, no appeal. Now that control is gone. Tele's license was revoked by executive decree. Their shares plummeted within hours. And foreign embassies across West Africa quietly reassigned their cybersecurity staff. But the technical marvel is just one layer. The deeper revolution lies in what Faso Telecom represents. For the first time, a rural mother doesn't need permission from Marseille to call her doctor. A farmer doesn't need a French interface to receive crop forecasts. A preacher's voice doesn't travel to Paris before reaching his congregation. Every message, every file, every call stays inside the country. Not just physically, but ideologically. Because in Burkina Faso today, code is not just functionality. It is identity. But where did this sudden capability come from? How did a country dismissed as poor and landlocked build what richer nations have only imagined? The answer may be more radical and more unsettling than you think. No applause, no celebration, just numbers and silence. That's how President Ibrahim Traoré chose to deliver the announcement. There was no drum roll when he named the number of towers built, 201 relay towers, engineered using local steel. No dramatic pause when he confirmed that the signal now reached 92% of the population. No fist in the air when he stated the network operated with zero foreign hardware dependency. He didn't need to. The numbers did the speaking. And the room, the packed chamber of engineers, soldiers, and regional leaders, sat stunned. Not because they didn't believe it, but because they knew what it meant. Burkina Faso had just disconnected from Europe. That same afternoon at the Paris Stock Exchange, the telecom sector took a hit. Tele SA's shares dropped 17% within hours. They had operated in Burkina Faso for 27 years. Now they had no license, no access, no future, and they weren't alone. A Luxembourg-based fiber conglomerate, Hilionet Group, filed a formal arbitration claim within 48 hours. Their complaint? Economic sabotage, contract violations, a $276 million damages claim. They argued that Faso Telecom's nationalization of infrastructure destabilized the regional business environment. Burkina Faso's Ministry of Justice responded with one sentence: "We do not negotiate the return of what was always ours." This was not a technical dispute. It was an ideological rupture, and the reaction was immediate. The Guardian warned of unchecked state control of communications. CNN Africa asked if Faso Telecom would become a tool for silencing dissent. The Economist posed a deeper question: can Burkina Faso be trusted with its own data? But inside the country, the emotion was different. In the border region near Djibo, a mother of three, named Zayla, logged into a pediatric consultation with a doctor in Bobo Dioulasso. The call, once dependent on a French relay server, was now routed peer-to-peer, encrypted, secure, uninterrupted. She saw the doctor's face. He spoke her dialect. She cried. Not because the connection was perfect, but because for the first time, it belonged to her. This was the quiet power of digital sovereignty, not in firewalls or fiber lengths, but in who gets to speak and who gets to listen. Across universities in Kinshasa, Addis Ababa, and Nairobi, IT professors rewrote their syllabi overnight. Faso Telecom became case study number one. In Ghana, an opposition MP asked bluntly, "If Burkina Faso can do it, what's stopping us?" But the boldness of Traoré's move unsettled old powers. Western embassies in the Sahel began increasing their cyber attachés, not because of terrorism, but because of code they could no longer read. For the first time, a country was building a telecom system unintelligible to foreign oversight. Code written in Mooré, Douala, and Fulfulde, not English or French. This wasn't just infrastructure. It was ideology, and it was contagious. But was this momentum safe? Could a nation so young in code and so isolated diplomatically hold the line, alone? And would the West let this go unchallenged? Or was the real battle just beginning? For the first time, the wires answered to the people. Just months ago, connectivity in rural Burkina Faso was a luxury. Internet was slow, expensive, and frequently cut off without explanation. Children shared devices powered by diesel generators. Clinics sent paper records by motorbike. Pastors recorded sermons on USB sticks, hoping someone in the capital could upload them. But then came Faso Telecom. Within 3 months of activation, the change was undeniable. Over 1,500 remote villages, from Toma to Tenkodogo, now receive consistent, encrypted signal. Internet usage jumped by 47% in rural regions, not because of subsidies, but because for the first time, there were no intermediaries. Digital access became a right, not a privilege. In the Sahel highlands, a young teacher named Abu now begins his day by logging into a national education hub. His students, many of whom had never seen a smartphone, now follow lessons in their own dialect, on devices powered by solar tiles mounted on the school roof. Their attendance has risen. So has their confidence. And something else has changed. Silence is no longer accepted. After Faso Telecom's announcement, Burkinabè citizens began re-evaluating other contracts long assumed untouchable. Activists demanded audits on water utilities, on road construction deals signed decades ago. Public forums filled with questions once whispered, if we built our own network. They asked, why can't we manage our own power grid, our own railways, our own schools? This cultural awakening had a political cost. Several regional governors, previously allied with foreign contractors, resigned under pressure. Old elite networks fractured. The National Assembly fast-tracked legislation to protect domestic data rights and prohibit any foreign storage of citizen information. The president's cabinet survived a confidence vote, but not without friction. Some ministers privately warned that Burkina Faso risked isolation. Others insisted that this was the very definition of sovereignty. Meanwhile, the diplomatic consequences deepened. Western embassies sent urgent cables to their capitals. Analysts in Washington and Brussels debated sanctions, not because of any violent act, but because of what Faso Telecom represented, a non-Western model of technological independence. In Ouagadougou, posters appeared overnight across bus stops, markets, and schools. They read, "What we build, we defend." This wasn't propaganda. It was reality, because across every sector, health, education, agriculture, the results were tangible. Faso Health Grid. 2.1 million citizens accessed digital medical records. Faso Farmet. 13,000. Smallholder farmers received crop forecasts. Birth Registration API. 88,000 new digital entries, reducing paper dependency by 47% in 4 months. But more than numbers, it was about dignity. In a small clinic outside Gaoua, a midwife named Fatimata recounted a birth that almost went wrong. She needed advice, fast. She tapped a code into her clinic tablet. A pediatrician in Ouagadougou appeared on screen. The newborn was saved. There were no buffering delays, no missing data, and, most importantly, no foreign company decided whether she could connect. But with so much shifting internally, what would be the response from abroad, especially from the United States? Would they see this as a threat or a challenge worth watching? What happens when the world's poorest countries stop asking for permission? That's the question now echoing through corridors of power in Washington, Brussels, and Paris. Because what Burkina Faso just achieved with Faso Telecom isn't just rare. It's disruptive. The U.S. Commerce Department quietly issued a request for clarification on spectrum governance within 72 hours of Faso Telecom's launch. Their concern wasn't bandwidth. It was precedent. If Burkina Faso can build and defend its own digital network, who's next? The European Union went further. A formal note of concern warned of potential risks posed by state-managed bandwidth ecosystems, hinting at fears that independent infrastructure could sideline global surveillance capabilities. They weren't wrong. Faso Telecom's backbone is invisible to Western audit tools. Its encryption protocols are coded in Fulfulde and Moure. Its firewalls tested against Sahel-specific cyber attacks, and its satellite telemetry handled by technicians trained not in Silicon Valley, but in Koudougou. This isn't just about Burkina Faso. It's about controlling the narrative. Because for decades, Africa's digital infrastructure wasn't built with its people in mind. It was built on top of them. Now, the script is flipping, and the U.S., long considered a silent partner in Africa's telecom evolution, must decide where it stands. Does it support local sovereignty, or does it fear the erosion of strategic visibility? One former diplomat called Faso Telecom the diplomatic firewall, Because when data doesn't travel through familiar hubs, foreign influence falters, intelligence weakens, and suddenly, small nations become less predictable and more powerful. So if the signal no longer passes through Europe or America, what else might be lost in the dark? And what happens when other African nations decide that connection begins? Not at the modem, but at the vote. Officially, Faso Telecom was a national project. Unofficially, it may have been a direct threat to decades of covert control. Let's follow the breadcrumbs. Just 3 weeks before Faso Telecom's launch, a cybersecurity attaché from the French embassy in Ouagadougou was recalled without public explanation. 2 days later, a quiet directive from a major European cloud provider was leaked, instructing data centers in Dakar and Abidjan to begin auditing traffic from IPs associated with Burkina Faso. Coincidence? Maybe. But then came the financial anomaly. $47 million in gold transactions redirected from offshore accounts back into the Burkinabè treasury, all traced within 10 days of the government's telecom sovereignty decree. Where had those funds been? And who had been holding them? Then there was the contract black hole. Archived bilateral agreements signed in 1998, supposedly outlining shared infrastructure ownership, suddenly disappeared from both EU and Burkina Faso's digital registries. Gone. Entire frameworks erased. And the most curious detail of all, the lead encryption protocol for Faso Telecom, Kudugu Shield v3, was built using an algorithm that closely mirrors a disused European defense framework, retired in 2017. The implication: someone inside the old system rewired it for liberation. Who? Was it rogue engineers? Was it a buried faction within the Ministry of Information? Or was it something deeper? A digital resistance long in the making, waiting for the right leader to greenlight the revolt. The theory gaining traction in some circles is chilling. Faso Telecom was not just a network. It was a test, a prototype. If it works in Burkina Faso, it can spread. Mali, Niger, Congo, each a domino ready to fall. And the West? Caught flat-footed, with its back doors closed, its bandwidth rerouted, and its signals scrambled. So who really lost control when Faso Telecom came online? Was it just a telecom company? Or was it an empire disguised as infrastructure? This isn't just a telecom story. It's a warning. Burkina Faso may have flipped a digital switch, but in doing so, it may have also triggered a global realignment. As of this recording, talks are underway to extend FasoNet into parts of Mali and Niger. The initiative isn't branded as expansion. It's described as continental symmetry. Quiet, coordinated, continental. Across the region, analysts whisper what diplomats won't say aloud. If Burkina Faso proves this model works, who's next? What happens if 5 nations cut off external signal flow? What if Sahel states coordinate not just firewalls, but foreign policy through encrypted networks? What happens when Africa stops uploading its future and starts owning it, byte by byte? These are not theoretical questions. They are strategic threats to a global status quo built on digital dependence. And if you think this will stop at fiber cables, think again. In the next 90 days, if a unified data sovereignty alliance forms between Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey, foreign surveillance will lose operational access to a region twice the size of France. No more predictive analytics. No more metadata trails. No more quiet influence. If that happens, we're not just witnessing a telecom shift. We're standing at the edge of a geopolitical rupture, and the West, once so sure of its control, may find itself watching, disconnected. So now the question isn't whether Traoré's strategy will succeed. The question is, can the world handle an Africa that governs its own signal? Because when the code speaks our language, when the towers stand on our soil, and when the power flows through hands that once held nothing, what old truths must be rewritten? If this story stirred something inside you, if it reminded you of battles fought, voices lost, and dignity reclaimed, then don't just watch. Bear witness. Share your truth below. And if you believe that Africa's freedom shouldn't be downloaded, but designed, then let your light reach beyond the wires. Because what we build, we defend. And may God bless every signal that rises in defiance and dignity.